that every single thing they do, it's worth seeing, and they become a little bit annoying. When you want to publish something, you do look for the information, wherever it is. Obviously, there are architects who prepare better the information than others, but you can keep asking and do your job. Now, if they prepare everything and they do your job, it's up to you. Sometimes, I mean, in the magazines, we are just like everyone else in the world. I mean, we are working more hours than ever, little time, so, you know, you may receive something, you think it's all right, you go for it. It would be so much better if you looked for it, because then it's obviously everything is your responsibility, but if you look for it, it seems that you're doing your job in a better way, in a more... But I think that as long as you are able to give arguments on your opinions, as long as the readers are able to understand where you are writing from, what you intend, what do you value, what you don't value, I think it's an honest game. And if it's an honest game, it should be worth for the readers and for the architects.
There's always the question of, you know, should a writer about architecture explain the architect's intentions, or should they offer a reading, una lectura, no? A reading of the building that may have nothing to do whatsoever with what was intended? And I think that's a very important question, because one is to read the press release and kind of translate the archi-speak into sort of more normal language, and another thing is to actually enter into a reflection about society, about why is this even being built. Many questions are not just about the architect, but indeed about, you know, what are the motives behind the Guggenheim in Bilbao, and questions like that. And I think it's I would really like to have the time and the budget and the means to be able to actually interview users, the client, you know, the person on the street, and I think it would only enrich an article. Actually, I think there could be a lot of interesting, probably stories told through that.
About this question of should the institutions run after the journalists in order to sell them, to say, so, this new building, this new venue, etc. Well, thank you, but our job is to look for it. Well, maybe we're talking from a very journalistic point of view, but I think that this business is our business. There was a classical author, I don't remember the name, and I don't remember the quote even, but the thing was more like, you get rid of the rabbit that comes to your door, and you run after the one who escapes. So in journalism, that makes sense, because many times the story which they want to sell you with a nice envelope and with some ribbons everywhere, etc., is not the story you're looking for. The story you're looking for could be any other one of your interest and of the interest, or what you consider to be the interest of your readers. Because at the end, after 10 years, 15 years, 25 years writing, you have the illusion that you know which is the relationship in between your readers and you, what they are expecting from you, what are you able to offer them, etc. So, of course, it depends on every person, because now we can go there to quite a delicate issue like, does my way of writing fits in the informative sector, or is a bit of criticism in it as well? Or no, you have to find your place and to be comfortable in it, but it takes some time.
I must say, if I can, I'm very optimistic at this particular moment we're living. I mean, I acknowledge all the problems we have and so forth, but I think we are at a time that we can look at architecture from a very much broader point of view. And I mean, for years, I've been working in my paper for about 25 or 26 years. And, okay, we'll talk personally and non-personally. Just as I said before, 5 years ago, there are so many things that today have to do with architecture. We talk about public space. We talk about non-demolishing buildings. We talk about public action. We talk about collectives. These things would have never, ever, ever made the news only 5 years ago. And I have the feeling that there are more people, more architects interested in making construction be part of architecture. You know, the classical, the only 4% of buildings is architecture and the rest is construction. And architects were really only focused on the 4%, which is, I mean, really doesn't make any sense from any point of view. So I think we are changing that altogether. I mean, a young generation of architects, and this is being changed. And also I can say, speaking for myself, I can say that I have seen that changing. Me, being, first of all, not an architect, you know, because in papers, we are journalists, we write, we are journalists. But I am an art historian as well, but I was nothing for architects. And being a woman, forget it, no? I mean, just the whole thing together. In Spanish newspapers, architects used to write in Spanish newspapers. And you know what happens? That when writing is not your first job, you have some other interests. I write here, you write there for me, I give you this, you give me that, then they start organizing competitions, they start doing some other extra jobs, and they become so powerful because they are basically using the paper. I mean, all of our papers, but yours not, have had traditionally architects running the architecture section. And that eventually became a problem, because that was not their first job. So, because of all these different things, I am very optimistic, quite optimistic.
I'd like to open the questions to the public, or the same questions, or the architects, or Sandra.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to ask something, because
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to join you. I'm Sandra from Detail magazine. I just wanted to ask you something, because you said that architectural magazines are historically critical magazines. I think that is not true at all. It's the opposite. Architectural magazines are historically magazines made from architects for architects to show technical details. If you read the first Domus issues, for example, it's always the architects telling the stories on their own works. Nowadays, this might be a wonderful source if you read Le Corbusier's, diary of Chandigarh, but it has never been critical, in a sense. So this is one point I wanted to make sure. And then there's another very interesting aspect I wanted to mention. You said that architectural magazines, they deal within the family. So that's true, but it's even more difficult to criticize the family, I think. And the family is not a big public. So when architects come to criticize architects, that remains within the family, but that's not the public. And I think architecture is a challenge that must be more wider than to open only to other architects. It's really an issue that concerns the whole public. So the thing is, my point of view is that maybe we, even because you were mentioning also all those nice, forms and aesthetics and the star architecture, but maybe there is also a shift of a paradigm, and we think that architecture nowadays is not only about forms and aesthetics, it's also about economics, about politics, about participation, and about many, many other things, about real estate developments, about corruption maybe. And in the end, there is a result. The result might be nice or ugly or what else, but the story behind is the thing that is, in my eyes, more interesting than a nice form in the end.
Can I just respond briefly to what you said? I wonder if there's a cultural difference, because I had in mind, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that the longest running architecture magazine around is the Architectural Review. Correct me if I'm wrong. But that was, yes, and it is, and it's true that there were architects writing in these magazines, but there was a kind of evaluation going on usually in the writing. And, oh, this is good, and this works, and this doesn't, or at least the texts I've come across. Well, maybe it's not critique. Maybe it's not critique in the Pierre Bourdieu sense, but there is, well, there's a difference between commentary, criticism, and critique that's been written about. But it is nevertheless sort of judgmental and evaluatory. At least those are the texts I've come across were like that.
At the bottom about the architecture review, I don't know if you remember Cenk's book. And there was the explanation that architecture review, for example, in 60s, have a really big impact on what happened in Great Britain. So it was a criticism, but it was also the idea how this country should look like. So I think that there are some moments in the history that journalists and architects and architectural critics can have such impact. And I also agree that it is this moment that a lot of things are changing in our society, but also in understanding the architect's role. I see, for example, in Poland, how many young people are really involved just in social life, and they are discussing, meeting with their neighbors, for example, and they really they are very emotional involved, and they treat it like a mission. And when I am talking with them, they told me that it is much more important for them than to build a really beautiful building, because it is something for people. So when you are asking Miriam what is alluring for media, I think it depends on time, but it also depends on us. And we also must think about that we can have an impact, to have a better surrounding. I'm absolutely sure.
About this idea of a switch of attention to different subjects in architectures nowadays, not just, the press is not just interested in the iconic architecture anymore. Well, it's not a matter of we journalists being, let's say, whimsical. Now this, now that. No, it's just to reflect of what is going on. People who, at the end of the 20th century, were studying at architecture schools, they all wanted to build buildings like iconic buildings, because that was in the magazines and in the newspapers, and it was the reference. What happened? The day they left the school, they discovered that there was no no project for iconic architecture for them, of course, but not any kind of commissions for them. That's what happened here in Spain for some years. So they had to look to another site. Obviously, they had no choice. And they decided to start, how can I build a house for the lowest price anyone can imagine before, or should imagine before, right? And then a new generation of architects, which are among the most interesting and talented architects here in Barcelona, for instance, around 40 years old, are people who started working in a very, very difficult situation and who had to switch their focus from one thing they thought was going to be their future, to reality. And reality was different, so we as journalists pay attention to the reality surrounding it. This is our job. Of course, we have to pay a bit of attention, that's all.
There was a question back there. But...
Yeah, I would like just to say some very general comments about the discussion, no? Because probably, I know, we, as an architect, we are the subject of this discussion, no? In a way, no? We, our, yeah, the other part, we and Xander, no? Yeah, exactly. So, I would like just to give you some general ideas about our experience, for example. No? And I think that for one side, for an architect, is it very, very difficult to transmit some kind of idea that are behind our architecture, or at least in our case, me and Alberto. I think it's very difficult in with the media transmit all the difficulties and also all the statement that we try to transform into architecture. Even if the magazine is very, I don't know, very for a large public, it's even more difficult in a way than the more specialized in architecture. So for our part, I think there is, in general, I think from architects, it's very difficult to transmit why you are working in some kind of way, in this way, on the other way. And then I think that from the media is very, very difficult or almost impossible not having a very partial view of your works. For example, I think that the different projects we did until now, Szczecin, but the museum in Switzerland or other projects that are going, has been from the media interpreted in a very, very different ways. No? For example, I can remember, for example, the Szczecin, the project in Szczecin received for sure a lot of attention from the Polish for this reason that I spoke at the beginning, because not only the architecture, because of the general context of the situation, has been received with some kind of difficulties, for example, in Spain, because the period we received the prize was the ending or